Hello, I'm Michael Pearson. This is the human condition. We've had so much interest since I did our episode on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So many people have said how I might treat President Biden, given some of the things that have come up in the media. Now, I want to be extremely respectful here, and I think it's very important to do that. What I've done in this series is I'm using public figures who are fair game to illustrate scientific concepts and medical concepts because they are current and they are clearly observable to everyone. So this is a tool that a lot of educators use, and I am using it with full awareness that I'm not trying to upset anybody. But in this video, I am talking about how I might respond if I were to evaluate or render an opinion and treat Biden in 2024 or earlier in his life for some of his more public symptoms, which I'll go through. This is a compassionate, non-political overview that looks at this public figure as fair game to illustrate common principles of clinical and lab medicine and to increase awareness of alternative methods. Please accept my intention to educate here is not a jab at him. All of us have had medical issues come up in our lives, and we deserve compassion, and I will express that today. So let's talk about some of the current symptoms. Now, obviously, I can't diagnose from here. I'm not the amazing Kreskin. I can't do that. But what I'd like to do is talk about how I might make a diagnosis and an assessment of alternative methods, which is different than medical diagnosis, and in addition to it and deeper, and what I might do to offer different kinds of treatment. Obviously, this wouldn't be complete because I haven't seen the man, but I want to talk about some of the current symptoms that we've all seen and talked about, and I want to be very frank about them because they are important. We have seen symptoms of the voice becoming more quiet. We've seen symptoms of the words becoming more slurred, where consonants go away and we just have some mushy consonants and some movements that are much smaller with the mouth. We have hands that come forward, and so the hands end up being held forward, not out in front like this, but in front of the hips, and so there's no arm swing. We'll see that problem with the arms not really moving alternately; they just stay out in front. We see a shuffling gait where the gait becomes much shorter. The walking gait is GAIT, the walking, the steps that are taken. We see also with turning, the steps become very shuffly. And so that type of problem, we see a bit of freezing to the face where the face kind of takes on a vaguely surprised and frozen look with eyes a bit wider and the face a bit frozen. And again, I am not trying to poke fun. We're talking about the difference between, consonants and vowels. You've got a person that's trying to do a very difficult job and it's very stressful. So these are symptoms that can be Parkinsonian. They don't have to be, but they do represent some type of movement disorder. They may represent mild cognitive decline and aging, and they may represent parts of other illnesses. Now, I also want to mention that many Americans get this type of problem, and sometimes they end up with something called Lewy body dementia, which is a particular kind of substance that shows up in the microscope inside the cells of the brain. It's not as common as other types of dementia, but these are things that happen. And so while I am not diagnosing him today, I'm just throwing out things that should be investigated and ruled out. And in the world of alternative medicine, it's very important to rule out some things that are really big factors that are being ignored in medicine right now with regards to Parkinson's and mild cognitive decline. And those are lab testing for toxins and lab testing for metabolism. Those are normally considered not important. And I think that it's extremely important to look at the idea of testing for mold, testing for heavy metals, testing for glyphosate and other types of industrial chemicals and solvents that are in our world. We also, in functional neurology, chiropractic neurology, we do a full neurological exam. We would examine the cerebellum and the brainstem and the basal ganglia. We would examine cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. We would look at the motor and sensory system. We would look at the cognitive system and the memory system and do mini mental status evaluations and other types of paper, validated paper instruments that are used in psychology to measure cognition and memory and working memory and attention. We would look at attention deficit disorder because we also have to talk about the next topic here, which is that there have been past symptoms before all of this for many years that are not the same. everybody should be, given a mulligan for the occasional screw up. We all screw up words. I've already done it today. But what happens is we know that he's had difficulty in the past with some mild dyslexia, some mild crossing up of words, some difficulty with speech and word finding. We all get that if we're hypoglycemic or tired. We have little difficulty with word finding. We may know what word we want to say, but it doesn't quite come out of our mouth. And, the guy should be given some slack for that. And he's had that way, way back, well before any dementia would begin, if it were to begin. So we know that it's possible to have had a previous diagnosis of some kind of ADHD, some kind of a dyslexia, some kind of a speech difficulty, and some kind of a processing problem. Whether it's reading a prompter or getting words out when they come to you. Sometimes words come to us in a jumble, and we're so excited we want to say different things, and that happens to us. So I want to mention that those things were there before. And I also want to mention that while I'm not saying that there's something wrong with a person that has these things, that they may want to change, and they may want to move past some of those symptoms. And the profession of functional and chiropractic neurology offers some really cool ways of cleaning up those types of pathways in the brain. There's some really cool brain exercises that the profession of functional neurology offers to help increase function in people that have had diagnoses of things like Asperger's, autism, ADHD, PTSD, dyslexia, Tourette's, or any of the movement disorders like Parkinson's, or other types of movement disorders like dystonia or vocal dysphonia, as I've talked about before. So we have to look at all these things and remind ourselves that what is the root cause of most chronic disease? And it's chronic stress. So chronic stress here may mean food. And I don't know the diet of our president. I don't know what he's eaten. I would like to ask those questions, and I would like to see if I could put him on a keto or carnivore diet if he could handle that. And I would want to do some assessments of blood and urine and order some labs and do those kinds of things. I would also want to know if I need to do a detoxification on different systems. I'd want to measure the liver and the gallbladder. I'd want to measure the bile. I'd want to measure some things in the immune system. I'd want to make sure we don't have an autoimmune condition that we've missed. So I'd want to do some screening for autoimmune things in the blood. I mean, after all, we're evaluating the president. There should be an ability to go very deep and afford these decisions. I want to have balanced posturography done. I would want to stand him on a force plate, which is a device that you stand on, and it hooks up to a laptop and it measures your sway. So every time a person, and I'm sitting, but let's imagine that I were standing. If I were a patient standing on this force plate, I would have some movement, and it would be subtle movement. Now, I'm exaggerating that right now to show you, but there is something called an ellipse. And that ellipse is like an elongated egg that's off to one side, that's based partly on your handedness and on your dominance of which ear is dominant, which eye is dominant. And so it's an ellipse that looks roughly like this. If you look down at your feet, that ellipse looks roughly off to the side. And it should be, within 45 degrees. It shouldn't be way over to the side, but it should be within 45 degrees of off center to one side or the other. And that's the course with which your body sways. So if you look down on me from above, you'll see that I sway kind of forward right and backward left, or forward left and backward right mostly. And most of the points of my sampling, if you were to sample me, several times, several hundred times a second, you'd notice that I'm moving, and it's a very small amount. With Parkinson's, people tend to move less. They tend to be extremely rigid on this particular exam, and they tend to occupy a little spot, and they just don't move. It would be interesting to see that. We'd also want to look for other types of movement disorders. We want to see if there's any resting tremors or intention tremors, or resting tremors where a person is completely relaxed and something continues to move in a rhythmic fashion, like a thumb or a lip or a shoulder or a hand or a finger. We may also want to look for intention tremors, which usually come from the cerebellum, which would indicate that they look like when a person reaches for something or holds their hand up, there might be a tremor that starts and then goes away when they do other things. So those are cerebellar, whereas the resting tremors are more basal ganglia. Now, I talked a lot about basal ganglia when I did the RFK explanation. And so basal ganglia may be relevant here, and so may the rest of the brain, because Parkinson's is extremely neurodegenerative. So we have to look for toxins. There's a lot of evidence that shows that Parkinson's is a big factor in aluminum, in glyphosate poisoning, in insulin resistance and prediabetes, and it's a big factor with heavy metal exposure. And so I would want to evaluate the president for all of those things and check on all those. I would want to do a QEEG and ERP. Now, a QEEG is a brainwave map where we put a cap on a person's head and we measure their brain waves for 10 minutes with eyes closed and 10 minutes with eyes open. It's called an EEG. And we would have it read medically to see if there's any medical abnormalities, but we would also read it for dysfunction in a holistic way, which is an alternative way, which is part of what psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists and chiropractors do to look at mental health. We do that to look at optimal function of the brain, look for asymmetries, look for different kinds of what are called neurobiomarkers, and different kinds of things called endophenotypes, which are the different kinds of brain waves in different places to see if there's an abnormality that doesn't quite rise to the level of a neurodiagnosis, but it does have a dysfunction that could be addressed in some way with neurofeedback or diet or supplements or intravenous medicines of some kind. There's all kinds of ways to do that, even stem cell therapies. I'd want to know what medications that he is on. It's very important to know what medication interactions happen, because there are a lot of medication interactions that can really mess with the person, especially, when you're getting, over 70. You really want to look at those interactions. I would probably want to do an ERP as well, an event-related potential. An event-related potential is an active test, whereas a QEEG is a passive test. You sit there not moving with your eyes open for 10 minutes and your eyes closed for 10 minutes in a QEEG. With an ERP, you're actively responding to stimuli on the screen or in your ears, and you're clicking a mouse or you're clicking a space bar or you're doing something to note that you understand that something happened that you're supposed to respond to. And an ERP, there's actually more evidence in the scientific literature on ERP than there is on QEEG. It's very interesting. And so you would measure the voltage that's coming out of part of your brain, and you would measure the time that it takes to respond in milliseconds to that stimulus. And you would look at errors of omission and errors of commission, which are errors that you make and failing to respond. We would very likely look at the metabolism of the brain, probably do a SPECT scan of the brain, which is a scan that measures the metabolism of the brain. It's very, very useful. We may do a 3 Tesla or 7 Tesla MRI to look at injuries to the white matter using diffusion tensor imaging and try to see if there are problems with the white matter highways of the brain, not just the gray matter. I would do my full toxic labs that I've already talked about with you guys a million times, glyphosate and mold, and I would use the Mosaic lab for that. I would look at heavy metals in hair, all kinds of stuff. For options for treatment, and once we've done all this, we would start to create an idea of, is it actually Parkinson's? Is it not Parkinson's? Is it like Parkinson's? Is it more toxic? Is it more metabolic? Is it more degenerative? Are there any lesions from old concussions? Certainly, the president has had tremendous trauma in his life from the loss of children that have died from cancer, and he's had car accidents that have taken the lives of a number of his family members. So that kind of PTSD should be assessed. There are biomarkers for PTSD. Many, many people have PTSD and they function very, very well. And so that's not a stigma. And I don't want to make this a stigma, which is why I'm actually doing this video, because this is something that we all have and can deal with and can function at a high level as president of the United States. So I think he deserves, like anyone, the ability to be assessed and treated. So some of the assessments may be functional neurology programs that rehabilitate the brain. That would be brain exercises like eye movements and spins and vestibular training and other types of cerebellar training and coordination training to help the brain. He might do a detoxification method. I might give him something like a Fiji water, some kind of silicic acid water to help sequester aluminum from the brain and pull it out of the brain. I might try to do detoxifications for glyphosate, which can be extremely difficult. I might give herbs and diets that are very known to cause autophagy. That would be fasting. That would be ketogenic and carnivore diets. Now, with his age and slim build, I would probably not do massive fasting. I would probably end up doing a lot more keto and carnivore diets with him if I were given the choice. I would want to use blue light blocking exposures. I want to give him red light exposure and UVB and other UV light exposure. And we may use other EMF interventions, but we'd also want to block EMF. It may be necessary for him to be in some kind of a Faraday cage to sleep. And he may take naps and sleep at night in a Faraday cage. Because, who knows how much exposure the president and the White House get of EMFs. There's so much radar and microwave and EMF and Wi-Fi and all the stuff, all the airplanes that he has to get on, the helicopters and the rooms and all the scans that happen. There's so much electronic noise in his life that I would want to find a way to get him at least, in during nap time and during sleeping time in the night in a Faraday cage, and so that they can be in a Faraday cage. A Faraday cage is just a metal mesh, like a screen made of copper or some other conducting metal, that will block all of the radiation, electromagnetic radiation, and give a person a break so that they don't have any more EMF hitting their brain. That's a real problem. And I think too that, really everybody has this problem. It's not just him, but it's probably worse because of the incredible electric fields that he's around, given all the machines and protective devices that they have to use, and communications devices. We would want to look at supplements and medication integration. We want to make sure that there's supplements that are correct. It's possible that there could be supplements that contain heavy metals. I mean, for example, let's say that the president is taking a pea protein. It's very common for pea proteins to be high in heavy metals. So he might be taking a plant-based pea protein or other type of plant-based protein powder that is full of heavy metals. And I might have to test that and get him off of that. So that's important. I might use anti-inflammatory herbs like turmeric or boswellia, or I might call in Ayurvedic practitioners or Chinese medicine practitioners to help us with traditional Chinese medicine and look at acupuncture. Acupuncture has been shown to cause blood flow changes in brain nuclei that are very important at regulating blood flow throughout the brain and electrical activity throughout the brain. So that's pretty interesting science, and it's modern, even though it's an ancient technology using needles. But acupuncture might be a very important part of his work. I would command an entire multidisciplinary team to look at what's going on with him, just as I would with Robert F. Kennedy, to try to look at everything and do everything that's possible. So I think this is pretty exhaustive. I'm trying to reduce the stigma of mental illness and all the different things that can happen to us as we age. And it would be a true honor to be able to do this kind of a thing. I hope this has helped you and your family.